I'm going to introduce you to Jeane-Marie Bakken. I'll let her explain share a little of her experience and her role as a social worker. Jeane-Marie?
Hi. So I'm a social worker, so let's talk about what those are, because it was so funny to me. The other night I was at book club, and my whole book club is social workers, and we were talking about, I think we were talking about movies or something, definitely not the book, and the image of social work in the world today, is just not pretty. And we were having a good laugh and describing what people think, they're the welfare worker that comes and takes your children, that doesn't give you enough money, that takes you out of your home. I mean, they just have an evil portrayal, usually tight hair and a bun. I mean, they're just severe people. And we're not like that, so I just want you to know that. I never even met a county worker that was like that. But what do we do, and how are we different than, say, like a therapist, a psychologist, a counselor, all these different sort of nomers that kind of, we're all in this sort of the same pot. And I think the distinct difference between social work and some of the other counseling type people is that we really are on a two-track kind of road. And one is obviously what we call psychosocial, but really is the whole mental, emotional interaction with physical, and just that whole kind of brain and mental, emotional stuff. And then the other track that's unique to social work is that we also deal a lot in community and kind of where people are planted and where they're from and what are the resources out there. And we meld, so we do a lot of kind of hardline stuff too, a lot of financial, a lot of community support services and resources, and we merge and meld the two together. So that's kind of the way to think about a social worker, in case you were wondering. And when I listened to Michelle talk about her history, her story about the woman that she sat with is so similar to my very first kind of real story right out of school. And I was doing not oncology social work, I was doing hospital social work at the old, this is how, I'm dating, Abbott Hospital was still in existence, and that's where my first job was. And sometimes I went over to the old Northwestern. Now they're merged and they're massive, but Abbott was a teeny weeny little sweet place. And the first absolute pull I got that I couldn't even really define was a patient, and I'm not going to worry about HIPAA because it was 35 years ago. Her name was Karin Olsen, and she was just this absolutely adorable old Swedish lady. And she was not doing well, and she was failing, and I was working with her, and she was dying. And this was my very first experience. I don't think I had even known anybody who had died in my whole life, and I'm 22 years old. And I connected with her just like Michelle's talking about. It was like a magnet, and I didn't need to explain it. It was just, what is. But then came the very, very horrific day when I happened to be up on the unit and she coded, and they had a video monitor, and I watched them try to resuscitate her. And that was my first introduction to the violence of that act, which I had, you watch it on TV and you go thump thump and and oh no, that's not what that is. And I watched her die. And I just came away from that, I can't even explain it to this day, and it was so long ago, but I remember it very vividly, and I was just forever connected to the world at that time of death and dying. That was my initial sort of interest. And I started reading everything I could find, and eventually my positions changed, and I gravitated, and I ended up in oncology about 2 or 3 years later, and never left, absolutely never left. And I've kind of worked the whole continuum of, I've worked in clinics, I worked at Abbott Northwestern for about 20 years in oncology, primarily inpatient, but some of their outpatient, and I was there when Virginia Piper Institute was born and got to be part of formulating that whole concept. And I was at the U doing program development, not social work, and I've worked in hospice, and now I'm at Minnesota Oncology in clinics. So I have just had a wild ride, and I've just kind of been there at all these sort of different points along the journey. And it's just neat at this time in my life for it all sort of, to come together. And one of my friends, one of the social workers in book club, we were saying farewell to one of our colleagues, and we all decided to go out and get one of those little rocks, you know, with a word on it, and we did a little, this is social workers, you guys, this is what we do when we get together, and we put all these little rocks together, and we spoke, you know, and hers was the word sacred. Oh, I can almost not say it without choking up, because I just looked at Margaret, and I just gaped at her. I said, oh my gosh, and then she talked about how our work is sacred, and she's an oncology social worker now, and that single word has defined it for me ever since, that I had never quite put it in that category, but it is very sacred work. And so when people say to me, oh, how do you do what you do? Isn't it depressing? It just, oh, now I can come back at them. No, it's not depressing, it's sacred. And I mean, there's a whole world of joy and emotion and all kinds of things that are in that word. So that's me.
Well, thank you. What do you see as some of the most common challenges and fears and worries of cancer survivors as well as their families from a social worker perspective?
Well, it really varies along the continuum, again, you know, that Michelle spoke so well of from the time you're diagnosed and maybe going through treatment, whatever your treatment is. Some people just, you know, have surgery and that's their cure, surgical cure. Other people have to go through the throes of chemo or radiation. And there's just a wide continuum. And so obviously each time you come to a period of sort of transition where you're kind of entering a new arena, whatever that may be, the questions all bubble up again. It's all new again. You start over. But at the very, very beginning, the obvious that I think too often doesn't get said out loud is, am I going to die? Bottom line, that's what this disease is all about. This is the terror of cancer. There's something about cancer, to me, that carries that death threat more than any other illness, even though Jake and I were talking the other day, even though there are illnesses that are more life-threatening than cancer, the fear is in cancer. Cancer the crab, the whole image of it is very, very negative. So that's the first hurdle. And oftentimes, when you're sitting in the chair and you're getting the news and that flare comes up, am I going to die, am I going to die? And your mind is just racing. You're thinking about my family and how am I going to survive? I'm going to be able to work. Is my insurance going to hold out? These are all the things. While the doctor is giving you all this information, you're hearing nothing, you know. So that's a big one. And so really priority one that I have to work hard at remembering is that priority one is cure. Priority one is treatment. And don't even talk to me until I know where I'm at in the treatment of my disease. All this other stuff can wait, it's further down the road. I mean, it's spinning in your head, but to some degree it's fluff. Let's face it, we're in the business of saving our life at this point. So I think those are kind of at the beginning. And then I think that recurs if you recur. If disease comes back, if there's metastases, whatever, there's a complication. A lot of people tell me that that's even worse than the initial diagnosis because you've played the good game, you've played by the rules, you've taken your medicine, you've showed up at your appointments, you've done everything right, you've tried to get your head in order so you can cure yourself, you know, all these crazy things, and then bam, there's more. And that's a huge disappointment. So like I say, there's transitions where different issues present themselves at different times.
Could you give us some examples of challenges for the caregiver?
Oh, it's huge. And the caregiver is often operating in the background or in the shadow, and many, many patients will tell me that they're more concerned about their caregiver than they are about themselves, and that they think that the pressure is tougher for the person providing care than it is for them. They get all the attention, which, I mean, you're battling for your life, so that's kind of a big deal. But they do get a lot of attention and support, and meanwhile, here's this caregiver shopping, cooking, cleaning, transporting, supporting, holding, you know, just all of it. And that person really doesn't get kind of the acknowledgement unless they've got someone in their life that's been a caregiver who just really gets it. And those people often come forward and are very helpful. But I think that the energy thing I talk about around everything, and that's that your most precious commodity for a survivor or for a caregiver is your energy. And it's all about conserving your energy because you're up against monumental tasks. And, but for a caregiver, it just feels like, wow, you know, a person diagnosed with cancer has permission to take naps or to rest all day or to do what they need to do. It's the most permission-giving diagnosis there is. You know, you can do what you need to do for yourself. But a caregiver doesn't. A caregiver never really gets to slow down or stop.